It's time for Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, inviting the atheist, agnostic, and skeptic to examine for themselves the evidence for the Christian faith. We are all limited by what we do not know and by the things we think we know but are not true. Dr. Joe Mott earned his PhD at LSU and was a distinguished math professor at Florida State University for 38 years, helping to write 3 math textbooks and authoring over 30 research articles in math. He is now the host of this radio program, Defending and Commending the Faith. Here is Joe Mott.
Hello to everyone. Welcome to the program. Followers of Christ are still being called into action for defending and commending the Christian faith. In recent episodes, we have been discussing the 6 basic tenets of Darwinian evolution. We have already addressed tenets 1 through 4, including first, common descent with modifications, also known as common ancestry. Secondly, spontaneous generation, which means that life arose from non-life. Later, the scientists Francesco Redi, John Needham, and Louis Pasteur disproved spontaneous generation. The third tenet of Darwinian evolution is random mutation. Random mutations do not occur very often, and most mutations are damaging to an organism. Yet positive mutations are necessary to give rise to a surviving new creature. 99% of mutations are deleterious, and 1% have no effect at all. No useful mutation has ever been observed. The fourth tenet is natural selection. Natural selection is the engine of the Darwinian theory, but it is therefore impossible for natural selection to select on the basis of useful mutations. I think Darwin may have believed that natural selection effectively had a mind of its own and would arbitrarily select which individuals thrive. But natural selection is an unguided process. Therefore, it is not a conscious mechanism. It has no consciousness with which to select the best from the mutations that arise. Even if the most useful structure is selected by natural selection, this state of affairs will still bestow no new structure. Fast-running antelopes survive while the slower are hunted down by prey. But this process will never turn antelopes into leopards. It is impossible for natural selection to act according to a pre-designed plan. That would be to claim that natural selection is conscious. It's a grave error to maintain that random, unguided events are actually conscious. But in order to escape the embarrassing effect of their claims of chance, Darwinists try to give the impression and deceive people into thinking that natural selection is conscious. Darwinian evolutionists claim that natural selection must plan an organ such as the eye before any such thing exists. Know all the properties it must have beforehand and bring all the requisite stages according to a plan, while never making an error. It must do all this until an eye emerges. It must produce a succession of perfect structures, create a brain that sees the image, and a consciousness to interpret what it sees. It seems remotely impossible for unconscious atoms or molecules to do this. But that is what Darwinian evolutionists insist on claiming. Darwin himself said in chapter 6 of On the Origin of Species, is it possible that an animal having, for instance, the structure and habits of a bat could have been formed by the modification of some other animal with widely different habits and structure? Can we believe that natural selection could produce, on the one hand, an organ of trifling importance, such as the tail of a giraffe, which serves as a fly flapper, and on the other hand, an organ so wonderful as the eye? The evidence from biochemistry regarding Michael Behe's irreducible complexity of the cell gives Darwinianism additional problems. Behe gives a mousetrap as an example. If any of the parts of the mousetrap are missing, it is non-functional. The human eye is irreducibly complex and cannot have been evolved. The eye cannot gradually accumulate all the specific parts between each attainment, because at each developing stage, the eye will not give human sight. The eye has to be constructed in one gigantic construction. This suggests it had to have been designed. Who or what designed it? The elements of the flagellum can be said to be an example of irreducible complexity. The fifth tenet of Darwinian evolution is time. Thus, the process needs time and lots of it. Since the earth is not eternal, and its age is approximately 13.7 billion years old, it seems unlikely that there is enough time to account for all the creatures to occur from random mutations. I have not at this time given an argument for what I just claimed, but I am willing to if you think you need it. The sixth tenet of Darwinian evolution is genetics/heredity. Genetics, the study of heredity, is married to Darwinism to come up with neo-Darwinian evolution, the sum of all biological processes by which characteristics are transmitted from parents to their offspring. To this list of 6 tenets of Darwin's theory, we possibly could add variation, adaptation, gradualism, and the tree of life. Stephen Stuart Thompson, a former professor of natural history at the University of Oxford, in 1987 was appointed president of the Academy of Natural Sciences, and in 1998 was named director of the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. He remarks, change over time is a fact, and descent from common ancestors is based on such unassailable logic that we act as though it is a fact. Natural selection provides the outline of an explanatory theory. Notice something about Thompson's response. He used the simplest definition of evolution to say evolution is a fact. I believe everyone will agree with that change over time definition of evolution. Unfortunately, evolutionists are not referring to this simple definition or to microevolution. They are referring to macroevolution and are saying that it is a fact. They have never seen it in a laboratory, never observed it in the fossil record, and they have no evidence to support their claim. This ploy is a common subterfuge of evolutionists. But then Thompson jumps from that simple definition to the first of the 6 tenets in a nutshell form of Darwin's theory of evolution, namely descent from common ancestors. While this may not be obvious, it is generally accepted as fact. Ernst Mayr, M-A-Y-R, the renowned German-American biologist mentioned previously, an author of many books and articles, including the book Toward a New Philosophy of Biology, says the central core of evolution is generally defined as changes in trait or gene frequency in a population of organisms from one generation to the next. This has been dubbed the standard genetic definition of evolution. Thomson's unassailable logic did not address Mayer's expanded definition of evolution. In fact, what he does address is a small part of Darwinian evolution. He does address natural selection somewhat superficially, but omits any comments regarding random mutation. In the last episode, I quoted a comment from Britannica.com saying, "Natural selection cannot explain the origin of life. The theory of natural selection is a process that explains how species evolve over time through the adaptation of organisms to their environments." The mention of adaptation means the Thomson article is referring to microevolution. You will recall the following definitions. Microevolution refers to small-scale evolutionary changes, typically within a single population, that occur within a population or species over a relatively short period of time. In contrast, macroevolution refers to significant evolutionary changes that occur over long periods, often resulting in the emergence of new species. Microevolutionary changes are often directly observable and can be experimentally tested, such as coloration of a population like with peppered moths or beaks of finches. Macroevolutionary changes are typically inferred from the fossil record, comparative anatomy, or molecular data, making them less directly observable. These two definitions are not clear nor precise enough for a mathematician like myself. I recommend you consult Britannica concerning the concept of natural selection and the central argument of Darwin's theory of evolution, which starts with the existence of hereditary variation. Britannica says that natural selection is defined as the differential reproduction of alternative hereditary variants, which means that some variants increase the likelihood that the organisms having them will survive and reproduce more successfully than will organisms carrying alternative variants. Selection may occur as a result of differences in survival, in fertility, in rate of development and mating success, or in any other aspect of the life cycle. All of these differences can be incorporated under the term differential reproduction, because all result in natural selection to the extent that they affect the number of progeny an organism leaves. Biological evolution is the process of change and diversification of living things over time, and it affects all aspects of their lives. In an article under the label of Copilot Search on the internet, says that natural selection is involved in producing life. It is the process that drives evolution, leading to the adaptation of species to their environments. So that suggests, without co-pilot research realizing it, that microevolution produces life. That is wrong, dead wrong, ludicrously wrong. That claim completely overlooks the fact that the fine-tuning of the fundamental physical constants of the universe were set at the very beginning of the Big Bang. This means that the so-called specific initial conditions were already in play, pointing to the possibility for life to transpire. So life can't be attributed to natural selection because fine-tuning exists prior to the time when natural selection came on the scene. Allow me to end this episode by reminding you, exercise daily. Walk with God.
Thank you for listening to Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, a production of Wave 94 Radio in Tallahassee, Florida. If you have any questions or comments for Joe, please forward them to Doug Apple at Wave94 at this email address, dougapple@wave94.com. And be sure to join us every Monday evening at 6:45 p.m. on Wave 94 and subscribe through your favorite podcast app. Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott.